The young man from Ferris Heating had been in my basement about 20 minutes when he stood up from the furnace, wiped his hands on a rag, and walked over to the thermostat on the wall by the stairs. His name was Danny Ocampo, 29 maybe. Polite, quick, the kind of technician who explains things without making you feel stupid about not knowing them. He tapped through a couple of screens. Then he turned around. "Who sets this to 51 at night?" My son was on speakerphone. I'd called Brad an hour earlier because the furnace had been making a sound like a man clearing his throat, and I call Brad about things like that. I've called Brad about things like that for 28 years. He was driving somewhere. I could hear the road under him, and he answered before I got my mouth open. "That's for him," Brad said. "Cooler sleeping's better at his age. His doctor said so." Danny said, "Huh." Then he crouched back down at the burners, and that was the end of it. I stood there on my own basement floor and let it go. I want to be honest about that, because it's the part I've had to sit with. I didn't say anything. There was a stranger in my house holding a flashlight, and my son had just answered a question about my body on my behalf, and correcting him would have taken about 4 words. That's not what he said. 4 words. You don't embarrass your kid in front of a working man. That's the rule I grew up with, and I never got around to questioning it. And there was another thing, which is that Brad wasn't making up the doctor out of thin air. There is a doctor, Anita Rusk, over on Corunna Avenue. I saw her in April because my hands had gone stiff and clumsy, and she pressed on the joints and asked me to make a fist and told me what I already suspected. Osteoarthritis. Morning stiffness. Common at 71. I'd told Brad about that appointment myself, sat at his kitchen table, and told him. So when he said his doctor said so, part of my brain heard something true and let the rest ride past. Danny worked another half hour. He replaced the flame sensor, cleaned the burners, showed me a crack in a gasket I didn't like the look of. Then he pulled up a screen on his tablet and turned it so I could see. "Your recovery's rough," he said. "It's short cycling in the morning. It's asking a 1998 furnace to climb 17 degrees in about an hour, every day. That's the hardest thing you can ask a unit this old to do. Because of the night setting." "Because of the night setting," he shrugged, not unkindly. "It's not my business how you run your house. I'm just telling you what's beating up the furnace." Then he said, the thing I didn't feel at the time, the way you don't feel a splinter go in. Whoever set it up did it remotely, by the way, not standing here. It's all in the change history. He wrote me a quote for a new unit, and I copied the number onto the back of an envelope, because I'm 71, and that's where numbers go in this house. 6,200. He said, "Take your time. It'll get you through the winter, probably." And he carried his tools up the stairs and out through the kitchen door, and I heard his van pull away. Then I stood in my kitchen for a while. Here's what I didn't do. I didn't call my son back. I've thought about why. I think it's because there were 2 questions in my head, and only one of them was about the thermostat. The other one was about my hands, and I wasn't ready to say it out loud, even to myself. What I did instead was take out my phone and open the app. Brad put that thermostat in on Christmas morning, 2022. Set the whole thing up while the coffee was going. Put the app on my phone. Showed me how to change the temperature with my thumb. I remember thinking it was a good gift. Thoughtful. The kind of thing a son does when he's noticed his father's getting older and wants to make something easier. I have opened that app maybe 4 times in 3 years. It took me a minute to find the history. It was right there, under the schedule, a list going back with names and dates on it. Schedule changed by Brad S. The 22nd of September, 2025, 11:47 p.m. night. Set point 51 degrees. 11:47 at night, 3 weeks ago. I scrolled up. The 6th of February, 2025 night set point, 53 degrees. The 3rd of December, 2024, night set point, 56 degrees. The 14th of September, 2024 night set point, 60 degrees. The 12th of April, 2024 night set point, 64 degrees. I stood there and read that list 4 or 5 times. It wasn't a decision. That's what got me. I'd been standing in the basement thinking somebody had made a decision about my house. One bad choice. One number set too low by a man in a hurry. It was 5. 5 times, over a year and a half, somebody had eased that dial down a few degrees and waited to see if I said anything. And I want you to understand, I never once faced 51. Nobody hands you 51. You get 64. And 64 is fine. You sleep better cool anyway. Then some months later it's 60, and you pull up the second blanket and don't think about it. Then it's 56, and you start wearing socks to bed, and you tell yourself the house is old. By the time it's 51, you've been getting colder for 18 months, and you have no idea, because you never once get to compare it to anything except the day before. One of those dates stopped me. The December one. That weekend, Brad was in Kalamazoo. Mia's team had a tournament and they drove down Friday and came back Sunday night, and he sent me a picture of her on the ice with her helmet crooked. I remember it because I put it on the refrigerator, and it's still there. So he wasn't standing in my hallway when he changed it. He was 3 hours away, in a hotel with his daughter asleep in the next bed, and he reached over and turned my house down. I sat down at the kitchen table. I've woken up at 4 in the morning cold for over a year. Feet aching, hands like a couple of wooden spoons, that particular cold that sits in the joints and doesn't leave when the sun comes up. I never told anybody, because what is there to tell? You're 71. This is what 71 is. Everybody said so. The doctor said so, more or less. I scrolled down past the history, all the way to the bottom of the settings screen, where the small print lives. There was a line there I had never once read in 3 years. Enrolled. Thermsmart Savings Meridian Energy participant since the 12th of April, 2024. Schedule managed by Northline Home Energy. Northline Home Energy is where my son works. I called him that night, after 9, when I knew Mia would be down. Thermsmart, I said. Meridian Energy. Northline manages my schedule. There wasn't any pause at all, and that surprised me. I'd expected a pause. Yeah, Brad said. That's a good program, Dad. That's the one I got you the thermostat through. He explained the whole thing to me right there on the phone, easy as a man giving directions to the post office. Meridian pays contractors to sign up residential customers. The customer gets a free smart thermostat, 300 and change worth of hardware, plus bill credits. The utility gets to run automated setbacks at night when nobody's using the house. Everybody wins. It's a demand program, he said. Every gas company in the state runs some version of it. I get credit for sign-ups, he said. That's not a secret. I signed up my dad. Sue me. Then he said, your gas bill went from $184 to $121, by the way, January to January. You're welcome. I hadn't known that either. I pay my bills the day they come, and I don't compare them. You told that boy. A doctor prescribed it. I told him what he'd understand. He laughed a little. Dad, I'm not going to stand there and explain a utility demand response program to a furnace kid with a wrench in his hand. What was I supposed to say? I said, it's cold at night. It's supposed to be cool at night. That's the whole point. And then, in the same easy voice, the sentence I keep coming back to, it never goes below 60 anyway. I let that be the end of it. I said, all right. I asked about Mia's hockey, and he told me about a girl on the team who scored on her own net, and we laughed, and I hung up and went to bed under 2 blankets. That's the part people won't understand unless I explain it, so I'll explain it once. In 1998, my wife and I came apart. Kendra was 18 and she went to Tucson with her mother, and she was right to go. Brad was 16 and he stayed. Nobody made him. I was not a father worth staying for that year. I was a man who came home and sat in a chair in the dark and forgot that a boy in the house needs to eat at regular hours. He made spaghetti. He made it 4 nights a week for about a year and a half, badly, and he'd sit across from me and talk about nothing until I answered. You don't repay that. There's no arrangement where that gets paid off. So when he started handling things for me, I let him. The phone plan, the router, the homeowner's renewal when the rates jumped. The $6,000 in 2016 that neither of us ever mentioned again. I'll take care of it, Dad. 28 years of that sentence, and I never told my son no. Not once that I can remember. I'm not sure I ever learned the shape of the word. He came by that Saturday and fixed the porch light. I want that in here too, because it's true, and because I've watched people tell stories like this one and leave out everything decent. The porch light had been flickering since August and I'd been ignoring it. He showed up at 10 with a voltage tester, found a corroded splice in the box, cut it back, and rewired it in about 40 minutes. Wouldn't take a dime. Ate a ham sandwich standing at my counter because he wouldn't sit down. Said he had a walkthrough in Durand at noon. On his way out, he rubbed his jaw with the back of his hand, the way he's done since he was a boy before a test, and made a joke about the F-250 being the most expensive way a man ever proved something to himself. I figured it was the truck payment. He squeezed my shoulder and went. That was my son. That was also my son. Tuesday, Mia came at 4 the way she does. She's 11. She's been coming since she was 8, and she plays on the Chickering, the 1927 upright I rebuilt in '94, and she is not particularly good yet, which I find delightful. She was murdering a Clementi sonatina, just butchering it, cheerfully, at about half the tempo it wants. I took the fork out of my pocket. Walt Price gave me that fork in 1981. First year I worked under him. A plain steel, a 440 worn smooth at the stem. I tapped it on my knee and set the stem against the plate and let the note come up out of the wood. That's the A, I said. Everything else is an argument with that. She played the A. Then she played it again and said it sounded sad, and I said all A's sound sad in October. And then, the way kids do, sideways out of nowhere while she was working the fingering, Dad, let me pick the pizza place Friday. He won November. He won November. He's got a chart on his computer with all the houses on it. She hit a wrong note and didn't stop. Yours is the good one, Grandpa. It always wins. I laughed. I remember laughing. I said something like, well, tell him I want a cut. She went home at 5 with her books in a grocery bag, and I stood in the driveway and waved at Jenna's car. That night I set the thermostat to 68 and went to bed feeling like a man who had solved something. In the morning, it read 51. I did it again the next night. Held the button down longer, the way you do with anything that isn't working, and watched the number climb, and there it sat at 68 when I went up the stairs. 51 in the morning. The third time I found the small gray line under the number. Temporary hold. Schedule resumes 10:45 p.m. My house was overriding me. Every night at 10:45, whatever I decided got thrown out, and the real schedule came back. And the real schedule didn't belong to me. I went down to the basement to work, because that's what I do when I'm chewing on something. I opened the Chickering, and I tuned it in June, and it was flat. Not evenly flat either. Flat the way wood goes when a room is swinging 20 degrees every night and back every morning. The plate and the pin block working against each other, month after month. I thought, well, there it is. My ear's finally gone. I tapped the fork on my knee. My ear was fine. The A was exactly where it always is, right where Walt put it in 1981, and I heard the whole distance between that and what the piano was giving me. It was my hands that couldn't do it. 9 in the morning, and I couldn't hold the lever steady enough to move a pin 2 cents. I set it down on the bench. I want to say something about that room. It's a slab floor. It's on the same zone as the rest of the house, which means it doesn't come up until around 1 in the afternoon, and I have worked mornings down there since 1979, because mornings are when a man's ear is clean. The next day I drove to Grieger's Hardware and bought 3 min-max thermometers, $14 apiece. Bedroom, hallway, workshop. I'm not a man who argues with people. I'm a man who measures things. While I was setting the one in the hallway, I remembered April 12th. Brad's kitchen table, spring of last year. 3 sheets of paper, Mia's hockey club waiver on top, a pen already uncapped and lying across them. Just initial there, Dad. I initialed all 3. I didn't read one word of any of them. Nobody forged my name. Nobody had to. I gave him permission with my own hand and then forgot I'd done it, and that is a harder thing to carry than being robbed. At 6:10 the next morning, I went into the bedroom in a sweatshirt and picked up the little plastic thermometer off the dresser. 50.7. I walked down the hall and looked at the second one, and then I went down the stairs, in the dark, and looked at the third one on the workbench. 47. My son had told me twice, in his own voice, that it never went below 60. Thursday, I had a reason to be at Trinity Lutheran that had nothing to do with any of this. Pastor Ochoa had called the week before about the organ. There was a sound in the blower, he said, a kind of rattle at startup, and would I come listen to it? I've been listening to that instrument since 1994. 31 years of Novembers, standing in that cold loft with my hand on the swell box, and I would have gone over there with a broken leg. The rattle was a loose bolt on the blower cabinet. Took me 4 minutes and a half-inch wrench. That's the thing nobody tells you about this trade. Most of what people are afraid of is a loose bolt. Afterward, there was coffee in the fellowship hall, because there is always coffee in the fellowship hall, and Ruth Pelkey was at the second table with her hands around a cup. Ruth is 84. I've tuned her cable Nelson since 1989, back when Dawn was alive and would stand in the doorway telling me the same joke about piano tuners every single visit. She was wearing a cardigan, and over the cardigan she had on Dawn's old flannel shirt, the green one, sleeves rolled 3 times to get her hands out. I said something about it. I said, "Ruth, you're dressed for ice fishing." She laughed. She said the furnace in that house had never been worth a nickel, and that she'd taken to sleeping in her robe. And then she said, easy as anything, stirring her coffee, "Bradley's company put the new thermostat in for me. He said the company knows best." I set my cup down. I don't remember what I said back. Something. I remember the sound of the folding chairs and somebody's grandson running past the table, and Ruth telling me about her sister's hip. Bradley's company, Ruth Pelkey, on Water Street, 4 blocks off Main, in her dead husband's flannel shirt. That was the moment this stopped being about my house. I went home and I did not call my son. A month before, I'd have called him and he'd have explained it to me in that easy voice, and I'd have believed him. Instead, I sat down at my own kitchen table and got into the Meridian account. My name, my address, my email, a password I set myself 3 years ago and wrote on the inside cover of the phone book. Nobody had to let me in. It took 90 seconds. Enrollment date, the 12th of April, 2024. Signature on file. There was a little image of it. My own initials, RS, the way I've written them on 12,000 service tickets. Participant comfort floor, 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Scheduled overnight set point, 51 degrees Fahrenheit. Window, 10:45 p.m., 5:15 a.m. I read those 2 lines maybe 10 times. 62 is the program's own number. It's printed right there in my file. In my agreement, the temperature, the utility, says a participant's house is not supposed to go below. Somebody had written 62 on my account and then run my house at 51 for the better part of a year. Then I scrolled, and there was a service history at the bottom, and in the service history there was one line. The 19th of February 2025. Participant contacted regarding comfort. Resolved. Satisfied. February 19th. I was in Tucson on February 19th. Kendra's birthday is the 21st, and I flew down on the 17th and came back the 24th, and I slept in her spare room with the desert going cold outside the window. I didn't talk to anybody about comfort. I didn't talk to anybody at all except a woman at the Delta counter in Detroit. Somebody put a note in my file saying I'd been contacted, and I was satisfied. That's the exact spot where the floor went out. Up until that line, I had a story I could live with. My son had put me in a real program, run it too hard, and lied to a repairman because he was embarrassed. That story holds. That story is a man being careless with his father. Careless doesn't write a note. A man being frugal on my behalf does not sit down at a terminal and type that he spoke to me on a day he did not speak to me. That takes a keyboard and about 40 seconds and a reason. And that's when Mia's voice came back to me, from the bench, in the middle of the Clementi. He's got a chart with all the houses on it. Yours is the good one, Grandpa. It always wins. A chart, with the houses on it, ranked, one against another, and one of them wins. It was never my gas bill. It was never the $60 a month. My house wasn't being turned down to help me. My house was being turned down to produce a number, and the number went on a chart, and the chart belonged to my son. I sat there a long while. Then I did the arithmetic I'd been avoiding since Danny Ocampo asked his question in my basement. March, the Meacham job, a Steinway A, 1,911, a full rebuild, the kind of work I've waited 20 years for somebody in this county to ask me about. I told Carol Meacham I couldn't take it. I told her my hands weren't up to it anymore, and I heard myself say it, and I remember being almost proud of how gracefully I said it. April. Pastor Ochoa asked if I'd do the annual on the organ, and I said I'd better let a younger man handle it going forward. May. I stopped answering the tuning line. Just stopped. Let it ring. Let the machine take it. Called nobody back. 44 years, and I retired by not picking up a phone. Because my hands were finished. Because I was 71 and that's what happens. I got up and got the folder where I keep the doctor paperwork and found Anita Rusk's visit summary from April. I'd read it once and filed it. Osteoarthritis. First CMC joints both hands. Morning stiffness. Nothing surprising. And down at the bottom, in the section I'd skimmed, 3 lines of instruction, the last one so ordinary I'd never once thought about it again. Keep hands warm prior to fine motor use. Warm water, gloves, warm workspace. Warm workspace. I have been getting out of bed at 6 in a bedroom at 50 degrees, running warm water over my hands at the bathroom sink for 2 minutes, in a room that's 50, eating breakfast in a kitchen that won't be warm for 2 more hours, then going down a set of stairs into a slab floor basement that reads 47 and picking up a tuning lever and trying to move a steel pin 2 cents inside a maple pin block. Every morning, 11 months. I didn't lose my hands. Somebody turned the house down. I sat in that kitchen chair until my coffee went cold, and then I went upstairs, to the bedroom, to the drawer in the dresser where I'd put the lever away in May. It was wrapped in the same chamois I've wrapped it in since Walt's day. I carried it down 2 flights and set it on the workbench where it's belonged since 1979. Then I sat on the shop stool in my coat, in the cold, and looked at it for a while. I didn't cry about it. I'm not sure what I felt was grief exactly. It was closer to what you feel when you find out a bill you've been paying for years was never yours. Friday, I met Charlotte for coffee at the farmhouse. We've been divorced 27 years and we get along fine now, which I understand is not how it goes for most people. She's married to Gary, who carried mail in this town for 31 years and is a genuinely decent man, and she lives 11 blocks from me, and we have coffee every month or so. I told her some of it, not all. Enough. She didn't tell me what it meant. Charlotte has never once in her life told me what something meant. She turned her cup around on the saucer and said, "You know what he did in '99? He worked out exactly how many days he could be gone before you'd ask him where he'd been. It was 4, and he never went 5. Not one time in 2 years." She looked up. "He's always been good at finding the line, Ray. He's just never crossed it." That night, I pulled the logbooks down. 1981 to 2022. Spiral bound, a shelf and a half of them. Every job I ever did in 4 counties in my own handwriting. The address, the date, the instrument, what I did to it, what it needed next time. Pelkey, Ruth, Water Street, Cable Nelson Upright, 1953, tuned 4/89, 11/89, and on, for 36 years. I got a legal pad and started writing down names, not customers, people whose front doors would open for a man who said he was Ray Sundberg's son. Fenn, Dolores, Hickory Street, Vandermolen, Bancroft, Kowalczyk. On M52. I stopped at 14 names and looked at what was on the pad, and my hand went still. I wasn't writing a customer list. I was writing a route. Saturday morning I started making calls, and there was nothing dishonest in a single one of them. Every November for 30 years I called old customers and offered to come by and check the pitch before the heating season really took hold. Free. 15 minutes with the fork and a lever. And if a piano had moved, I'd tell them what it would cost to bring it back in the spring. It was good for business, and it was good for the instruments, and I liked doing it. 4 calls. 3 yes. And every one of the 3 said some version of the same thing. Ray Sundberg, we thought you'd retired. Dolores Fenn was Monday. She's 79, on Hickory, in the little green house with the ramp Don Pelkey built for her back when he could still swing a hammer. Story and Clark Upright, Walnut Case, 1946, and I've kept it going since she bought it off an estate in Perry. She met me at the door in a coat. Inside there was a space heater running in the kitchen, one of those little ceramic box heaters, and it was plugged into an extension cord that ran along the baseboard and around the doorway. I said hello, and I said the house was cool, and she said the furnace was fine. It was the program. The piano was bad. Not just flat, nearly a quarter step in places, and worse in the bass than the treble, which is what happens when a room breathes 20 degrees in and out every night for a year. I could hear the whole winter in it. I set up my light and had to move a table lamp to get the outlet, and that's when I saw it. The receptacle behind the lamp was browned, not black, browned, in a fan shape above the top screw, the way a plate goes when something's been drawing too much through it too long. I put 2 fingers on the faceplate. It was warm, not hot, warm, at 10:30 in the morning, with nothing plugged into that half of it but a lamp, with a 60-watt bulb. The extension cord for the heater ran to the other outlet, by the door. I didn't like that one either. I asked her how long the heater had been going. Since about Christmas, she said. She'd been using it in the kitchen because that's where she sits. I asked her, as carefully as I know how, whether she'd ever called anybody about the cold. Twice, she said. 2 different times. What they say? They said the program requires it. She was looking at the piano, not at me. The girl was very nice. She said a technician would look into it. Nobody came. I stood in that kitchen with my hand still on the faceplate, and I asked her one more question, one I already had the answer to, and I hated the sound of my own voice, asking it. Do you remember who you talked to? She didn't. She was sorry. She said she should have written it down. I unplugged the heater, and I told her not to run it off that cord again, and I told her to call her nephew Kurt about the outlet this week. Not next week, this week. And I wrote his name on a card and left it on her counter so she'd have it in front of her. She said I was making a fuss. I said I'd made a career out of making a fuss about small things that turn into big ones. Then I sat in my truck in her driveway for a minute and looked at my hands on the wheel, and they were shaking, and it wasn't the arthritis. $60 a month, that's what I'd been carrying around in my head. $60 a month off my gas bill and 11 months of my hands. This was an 80-year-old woman with a scorched outlet and a $200 electric bill because somebody made her house cold and then told her the program required it. Wednesday, I went out to Kowalczyk's on M52, Baldwin console, 20 degrees of nightly swing, written right into the tuning. A woman who'd been sleeping in a hat since February and thought that's just what the new thermostat did. It took me 40 minutes, and it told me nothing I hadn't already learned on Hickory Street, except how many of them there were going to be. Danny Ocampo came by Thursday with the printed quote for the furnace, 6,200, same as the envelope. While he had his tablet out, I asked him something. That change history. On my thermostat. Is that all there is? That's the customer side. There's a runtime log too, what the house actually did. Temperature every hour. When the furnace ran. How long? He turned the tablet around and showed me where a tech pulls it. You can print 90 days. Anybody can. It's your unit. It took 2 minutes. He didn't ask why I wanted it, and I didn't tell him. He's a technician. Somebody asks a technical question, he answers it and moves on. On his way out, he mentioned his mother had an old Wurlitzer Spinet up in Chesaning that nobody had touched since 2011, and would I ever look at something like that? I said I might. That night, I laid it all out on the kitchen table like a man doing his taxes. My enrollment, signed the 12th of April, 2024. My own initials. 90 days of runtime, hour by hour. My house dropping to 51 at 10:45 and sitting there until 5:15. My participant file with 62 printed on it. One service note dated February 19th saying I'd been contacted and I was satisfied. 2 cold houses I'd seen with my own eyes and 1 brown outlet. And an 11-year-old girl telling me her father has a chart. It isn't a case. I know what a case looks like from 20 years of insurance claims on damaged instruments, and this isn't one. But it was enough to know. At 11 o'clock that night, I wrote my son a text message. I know what you did. I looked at it for a long time. And I'll tell you the truth about that stretch. Because if I leave it out, then none of the rest of this is honest. For about 10 minutes, I didn't want an explanation, and I didn't want it to stop. I wanted him to be cold. One night. Just the one. I wanted him to wake up at 4 in the morning in a 50-degree room with his feet aching and not know why. And I wanted to be somewhere else while it happened. I deleted the message. But I sat there another while with the fact that I'd wanted it. Then, sometime after midnight, I decided on the quiet way out. Unenroll the house, call Meridian in the morning, take my address off the program, say nothing to anybody, change my own passwords, and let it be. Brad keeps his job, Jenna keeps her hours, Mia comes Tuesdays, and I go on being the man who doesn't make trouble in his own family. I'd get warm, and everybody else's life stays exactly where it is. I stood up from that table with that decided. I got as far as the kitchen doorway. Then I thought about the brown fan shape above the screw on Dolores Fenn's wall. Monday the 24th of November, 3 days before Thanksgiving, I drove over to Water Street to check Ruth's Cable Nelson. The fork was in my coat pocket, where it always is. She had the flannel on again. The house was 58 in the middle of the day. I got about 8 minutes into the piano before I set the lever down on the music desk and told her I needed to say something. I told her all of it, sitting at her kitchen table with my coat still on, the thermostat, the schedule, the 62 on my file, the note in February, Dolores, my hands, my son. I have never in my life said the words "I'm cold" to another human being. 71 years. I said them to Ruth Pelkey at 11 in the morning on a Monday, and my voice came out wrong. She listened all the way through. Then she said, "I don't like to bother anybody, Ray." I said, "I know. That's what he was counting on." She got up and got the ThermSmart packet out of the drawer under the phone, the one they leave with you at installation, and put it on the table with the 800 number facing me. I dialed it on my own phone. I gave them my name, Raymond Sundberg, my address on Cedar, my account number off the top of the bill. I told the woman I was filing a formal participant complaint that my overnight set point had been run 11 degrees below the comfort floor on my own agreement for over a year, that there was a service note in my file claiming contact on a date I was in Arizona, and that I had reason to believe other homes on the same route were being run the same way. She was quiet for a second. Then she said she was documenting it and asked me a question I hadn't prepared for. "Sir, do you know who set the schedule?" I could have said no. It was true enough. I could have said the contractor. I could have said I don't know and let them find it, and kept my hands clean and my mouth shut and let it be somebody else's doing. I looked across the table at Ruth in her husband's shirt. Bradley Sundberg, I said. He's the field supervisor on this route. And then, because a thing like that shouldn't be left sitting there half said, he's my son. I unenrolled the house on the same call. Then I sat in Ruth's kitchen and changed the password on the Meridian account and the utility account and the phone account, and took his name off the two of mine he'd been an authorized user on since 2019. Walking out to the truck, I knew exactly what I'd just spent. I drove home past the rink on Adams and did the arithmetic without any trouble at all. Jenna wouldn't bring her. Not out of spite, she wouldn't have to be spiteful. She'd just stop, and it would be reasonable, and the Chickering would sit closed on Tuesdays. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Thursday still on? Bring the sweet potato thing. Furnace holding up okay? I typed, see you Thursday. I didn't answer the second question. I made the sweet potatoes and I went. That's a strange thing to have done, and I've thought about it. I'd filed a complaint against my son on Monday, and on Thursday I stood in his kitchen holding a casserole dish with a dish towel over it. But there wasn't any other version. Mia was there. Jenna's mother was there. It was Thanksgiving. I wasn't hiding. I was waiting. There's a difference, and any man who's ever mailed a letter he can't get back knows it. Brad carved the turkey. He was good at it, the way he's good at most things with his hands. And he made a joke about the electric knife his father-in-law gave them, and he put the dark meat on Mia's plate without her asking because she likes it, and everybody else in that family thinks she's strange for it. After we ate, Mia asked me to play. They've got a spinet in the front room, a nothing piano, and I sat down and played Bewitched because it was the first thing my hands went to. And my hands went. That's what I remember about that afternoon. 2 weeks. 2 weeks at 68 degrees, and I sat down at a stranger's piano and played a chorus and a half of a song without thinking about my fingers once. Brad stood in the doorway with a beer and listened to the whole thing. When I finished, he said, "You still got it, old man." I said thanks. That's the last decent moment we've had. December 9th, 20 of 8 in the morning, his truck was in my driveway. He didn't knock. He came in through the kitchen door the way he's come in since he was 16, and stood there, in his work coat with his hat in his hand, and he was gray. "I'm off the schedule," he said. "They pulled me. Compliance review, pending. They took my portal access at 6 o'clock this morning." I put the coffee pot down. "Somebody filed something," he said. "Meridian's got a complaint on a house on my route, and they're auditing 18 months of set points. They wouldn't tell me whose. Dad, I have got a truck payment, and Jenna's at 28 hours, and Mia's got $4,700 of orthodontia sitting in front of us. I filed it. I have never seen a man's face do what his face did. It went through about 4 things and landed somewhere very quiet. You," he said. Monday, from Ruth Pelkey's kitchen. He sat down, not because he decided to. His legs did it. 2 weeks, and he hadn't known. The quarter closed on the 30th, and his number was already banked, and there was no reason on God's earth for a man to go looking at his own father's house in December. By the time there was, they'd taken his login. Then he came back up out of it angry, which I expected, and the anger came out as an argument, which I also expected, because it was the argument he'd been making to himself for a year and a half. "It's inside the guidelines," he said. "Dad, night setbacks are literally what the Department of Energy recommends. Every utility in this country runs setbacks. Nobody was in danger. Nobody was freezing." "The floor on my account is 62, I said. "You ran it at 51. That's a soft number. It's printed on my agreement, the one with my initials on it." That stopped him for about a second and a half, and then he found the other thing, the thing I knew he'd get to, because I'd have gotten to it too. "You signed it," he said it almost gently. "April, at my table. You signed it, Dad." "I did." I sat down across from him. "I've signed everything you ever handed me, 28 years. And that's when it came out of him, not as a confession. He'd never have given me a confession. It came out as an accusation, which is how a certain kind of man tells you the truth. "Do you know what that truck costs me? Do you know what Mia costs? They rank us, Dad. 6 crews and they put us on a board, and the man at the bottom loses the contract for everybody. I was carrying my whole crew. His voice was climbing. And you never said one word. Not once. In 18 months, you never told me you were cold. Not on the phone, not at Christmas, not one time. What was I supposed to think? You'd have told me. You'd have said something. He was rubbing his jaw with the back of his hand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have anything I needed to win. You didn't set my house to 51. I said, you set it to whatever you were sure I wouldn't call about. That's a different thing, and you're too old not to know the difference. He didn't answer that. He looked at the table. So I asked him the only question I'd actually been carrying since the fellowship hall. How did you get into Ruth Pelkey's house? He said it flat, like a man reading off an invoice. He was past lying by then. I think in some way he was relieved to stop. I knocked. And? I said I was Ray Sundberg's son. There it was. 44 years I walked into people's living rooms in 4 counties. You do that long enough and the name gets to be a kind of key. Ruth left her back door unlocked for me for 36 years. Dolores Fenn used to leave a plate of cookies on the bench and go to the store while I worked. An 80-year-old woman alone in a house with a strange man in it. Because I was Ray Sundberg, and that was that. My son took that key off the hook and used it. 26 doors. He never had to buy a lead or knock cold on a stranger in his life. He walked into rooms that were open to him because of what I spent 44 years building in them. And then he went home and turned those rooms down. I asked him the last thing. Why was mine the lowest? And this is the part I'd take back if a man could take anything back. Because he answered it. And he answered it defensively, like it was the reasonable point, like it was the thing that ought to have made me understand. Because the average needed one house carrying it, he said. You can't get a quarterly number off a route where everybody's at 60. Somebody's got to be the outlier. And you picked mine. I picked the one house on the whole route I knew for a fact would never generate a complaint. He said it, and then he heard it. I watched it arrive on his face about a half second after it left his mouth. 26 houses of old people who don't like to bother anybody, and out of all of them he could only be certain about one. He'd been counting my days since 1999. He knew exactly how far his father would go without saying a word, and he found the line, and he went right up to it, and he never crossed it. He crossed it. He just crossed it so slowly, I couldn't feel it happening. The auditor called me twice. A woman out of Meridian's program integrity office in Lansing, careful and thorough, who did not tell me one thing she didn't have to. But I said something in the second call about hoping my complaint hadn't caused all this, and she stopped me. Mr. Sundberg, your complaint got us to look. That's all it did. Because here's what was in there, and none of it came from me. Every scheduled change on that route, 19 homes running below their own participant floors, was stamped with a user ID. His user ID. Date, time, minute. 11:47 at night from a hotel in Kalamazoo. It's a software platform. It writes down everything anybody does to it, forever. And the man doing it had signed his name to every keystroke for 18 months. And Dolores Fenn's 2 calls about the cold went to the supervisor on the route, and the supervisor closed them both himself. Same 7 words he'd used on mine. He'd typed that sentence 3 times. I gave them nothing they didn't already have. I answered what she asked and I didn't embellish it. I never called Northline. I never called a newspaper. I never told a soul in this town except Ruth Pelkey, who told her sister, who I assume told the entire quilting circle at Trinity, and that is a thing I set in motion, and I won't pretend otherwise. But the audit didn't need me. My son wrote the case against himself, 1 entry at a time, in his own login, for a year and a half. Jenna called me on a Sunday. She didn't yell. It would have been easier if she'd yelled. Mia's not going to come Tuesdays for a while, she said. I'm not doing it to punish you, Ray. Her dad is sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands and she's 11 and she can see him. I'm not going to put her in the car and drive her across town to you on top of that. I don't have it in me, and I don't think she does either. I said I understood. She said, I don't think you do, but okay. And it wasn't cruel, it was just true. I drove out that night and sat in the truck outside the rink on Adams with the engine off. Her practice was Sunday at 6, and I knew that the way I know the fingering of a scale. I sat there 20 minutes watching parents carry bags in through the doors, and I did not go inside, because I hadn't earned a thing by then, and I knew it. And then I drove home to a house that was 68 degrees and empty. The last week of December he came by once more. Meridian was clawing back $18,400. 6 quarters of performance payments, and they wanted it, and Northline wasn't going to cover a dime of it for a man they'd already terminated for cause. He stood in my kitchen, and he didn't argue, and he didn't rationalize. He looked 10 years older. And then he asked me, and it wasn't ugly. That's what I want you to understand. It came out easy and familiar and warm, the way you ask your father for something you've always been given. Dad, can you cover the 18.4? I'll pay it back. You know I'll pay it back. 28 years I never once said no to that boy. Not the truck at 19. Not the wedding. Not the 6,000 in 2016. I'm not sure I knew the shape of the word. No, I said. He waited. He waited for the rest of it, the reason, the softening, the but here's what I can do. That's the second half of the sentence. There has always been a second half of the sentence. I didn't say anything else. He stood there another few seconds, and I watched him understand it. Not that I was angry. He could have worked with angry. He understood that the account he'd been drawing on his whole life had closed, and that it had closed on a Monday in November, in Ruth Pelkey's kitchen, while he was in his truck somewhere thinking about Thanksgiving. Northline lost the Thermsmart subcontract at the January renewal and came off Meridian's trade ally list entirely, which took the sting out of nothing for the 4 other supervisors who never touched a set point they shouldn't have. 2 of them landed at a company in Flushing by March. I asked, because I wanted to know. Brad was terminated for cause the second week of January and barred from Meridian program work for 2 years. The 18.4 is coming out at $400 a month, and it'll be 2029 before it's gone. The F-250 went in February, and he drives a used Ranger now, and he took a counter job at a plumbing supply outfit in Flint, 45 minutes each way. Jenna went back to full-time at the dental office. Nobody was arrested. Nobody went bankrupt. Nothing was in the paper. That's the whole of it. And I've spent less time thinking about it than you'd expect. In February, I drove out to Water Street and gave Ruth's Cable Nelson a full pitch raise. It took 2 visits, a winter of 20 degrees down and 20 degrees back, every night for a year. And that instrument had gone almost a quarter step flat, with the bass sagging worse than the treble. You can't bring a piano that far in one sitting. You pull it up past where it needs to be, and let it settle and come back in a week, and do it again, or the whole thing just walks back down on you. Second visit, she paid me out of a coffee can of dollar bills, 84 years old, counting singles onto the kitchen table. I took it. 20 years ago, I'd have made a speech about how she didn't owe me anything, and she'd have been embarrassed, and I'd have felt fine about myself. I took the money and told her the base would hold now and asked her to call me in the spring. Dolores Fenn's nephew replaced that outlet and the whole run of wire behind it. He said the box was scorched an inch back. There were 19 of those houses. 11 of them had pianos I'd tuned at one time or another, and by the end of March, I'd been through most of them. They all had the same signature in them. That's the thing nobody would believe unless they do this work. A room's whole winter is written into the instrument, and you can read it. Dolores's Story and Clark. The Kowalczyk Baldwin. A Wurlitzer and Bancroft I hadn't laid hands on since 2009. I fixed them one at a time. That's the only way anything gets fixed. The house runs 68 all night now, and the basement is warm by 9 in the morning. I'd forgotten what my hands were. That's the plain truth of it. By the middle of February, I was doing 3 and 4 tunings a week, and by March, I was turning work down because I couldn't fit it. I called Carol Meacham about the 1911 Steinway A, and she'd already given it to a fellow in Ann Arbor. I sat with that a day or two. Then I let it go, because that instrument will need somebody again in 15 years, and there's a Mason and Hamlin in Ovid that's been waiting on me since 2018. That's what I keep learning at 71. The work doesn't run out. Only the man does, and only if he lets somebody talk him into it. Ferris Heating put the new furnace in the first week of February. $6,200, paid out of tuning money, which struck me as funny in a way I have not once been able to explain out loud to another human being. Danny Ocampo did the install himself. He was in my basement about 5 hours, and he never asked me why a man buys a furnace in February. The following week I drove up to Chesaning and tuned his mother's Wurlitzer Spinet, Elena. Nice woman, 76, hadn't had it touched since 2011, and it needed everything. Took me most of a morning and I wouldn't take a dime, and she sent me home with a foil pan of tamales, which I ate over 3 days standing at the counter. Kendra called from Tucson twice and offered to fly up both times. I told her not to. She said, "You're doing that thing where you handle it," and I said yes, I was, and we left it there. She's coming in June for a week, which is better anyway. June is nicer here than anybody outside this state believes. Charlotte heard the whole thing from Gary's sister before I ever got around to telling her, and when we had coffee in March, she didn't say one word about it. Just asked about my hands and told me Gary's knee is worse. That's about the kindest thing anybody's done for me this year. Mia came back on a Tuesday in the middle of February. Jenna brought her. She walked her up to the door, which she hasn't done since Mia was 9, and stood there in the cold while the girl went past me into the front room and straight to the piano. I didn't push it. I said thank you. Jenna looked at the porch light for a second. Then she said, "I read the letter from Meridian, the whole thing. I waited. I want to know why nobody at that company ever called Dolores Fenn back," she said. She called them twice. I said I'd wondered that myself. She nodded once and went and sat in the car and ran the engine for the whole hour, and that was as much as either of us had in us that day, and it was enough. In March, Brad came by unannounced on a Saturday and rehung the gutter over the porch, the one that's been pulling loose since the ice storm. He didn't ask. He just showed up with a ladder in the bed of the Ranger and started in on it, and I went out and held the ladder and handed him things for 2 hours. We talked about the gutter. We talked about whether the fascia needed replacing behind it, which it does. He said Mia's team lost in the second round. I said that's how it goes. We did not talk about one other thing, and I don't know if we ever will. He packed up around noon and I asked if he wanted a sandwich, and he said he'd better get back, and he backed the Ranger out and lifted 2 fingers off the wheel the way he does. That's not forgiveness. I've heard men tell stories like this one and tie a bow on it at the end that the facts don't support. My son and I are not repaired. What we've got is a door I've left open and a set of accounts he is not on and will not be on again. The new thermostat is a plain programmable one from the hardware store. $39. No app, no Wi-Fi, nothing on the other end of it. I set it myself, standing in the hallway with my reading glasses on, pushing the little buttons. Mia's been coming Tuesdays since. She's moved on from the Clementi to a Schumann piece she isn't ready for and won't be talked out of. Last week she stopped in the middle of it and swiveled around on the bench and asked me how I know when a piano's right. She's 11. She asks everything. She wants to know how you know when there's nothing to look at. I took the fork out of my shirt pocket. Walt Price put that thing in my hand in 1981 in a church basement in Flint and told me the only rule that ever mattered in this trade. I tapped it on my knee and set the stem down against the plate and let it come up through the wood. That one clean note filling the whole front room the way it has for 45 years. "Don't guess," I told her. "Check it against the fork." She said okay, and turned around and went back to ruining the Schumann. Nobody has to ask who sets it anymore. I do 68, by hand, standing in the hallway in my reading glasses, and in the morning, The A is right where I left it.